I thank the minister and recognize the member from Burnaby Deer Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I looked up and I was about to congratulate the new speaker on her position, and she was no longer there. But it's nice to see you back again. I want to congratulate all of my fellow members, those that have been re-elected, and of course the newly elected particularly. And I have to say particularly that I'm so pleased to, that my colleague in Burnaby Lougheed, who is sitting beside me, was elected for the first time, and I know that she is going to make a wonderful representative for the seat of Burnaby Lougheed. And of course my good friend and colleague from Burnaby Edmonds, who was also re-elected. I want to also start off by thanking my campaign team in the recent election. They were a wonderful group of people. We worked very hard, but we also had a lot of fun. So to Chantal O'Neill, who was the campaign manager, others like Tiffany Callan, Shannon Powell, Lorraine Shore, and Carol Riviere. And of course, now that I've mentioned 5 or 6 names, there are dozens of people beyond them that worked so hard in the campaign, and I thank them for giving of themselves and volunteering their time without getting any of the accolades or public notice, but they're wonderful people, and I thank them for what they did. And of course, part of that campaign as well were my wonderful constituency assistants, the inimitable Kate Jones, and who is newly and someone who has newly joined us, Isaac Valet, who both do wonderful jobs helping the people of Burnaby Deer Lake. I also want to thank the people of Burnaby Deer Lake, my constituents, for re-electing me. It is an honor to serve the people in my constituency, which is a wonderful and interesting constituency with a great deal of diversity, both financially and demographically. And I know many communities, I think I've heard many MLAs claiming that theirs is the most diverse community perhaps in Canada, but certainly Burnaby, if not the most diverse, is one of the most diverse communities in Canada. And we are simply a reflection of Canada. We are wealthy, some of us. We are poor, some of us. We were born in Canada, some of us, and we were born in on all corners of the globe. So we truly are a reflection of the Canada of today. To the budget. I've always believed that the foundational principle for life is that things should be fair. That when you are making decisions, you need to be fair. That when you deal with people, you need to be fair. That government policy needs to treat people fairly. That when you're on a sporting field, you need to be fair. And that when you deal with your own children, you need to be fair. Dwight Eisenhower said, "Though force can protect an emergency, only justice, fairness, consideration, and cooperation can finally lead men to the dawn of eternal peace." After the election, one of my sons came to me, and he was disappointed about the result, to be sure, not mine, but the overall result. And he said, "It's not fair, Mom." And I think he was right. In a way, I think that this election was won in a way that was not fair. It was won by a party that thought that it was all right to conduct a smear campaign against our leader and ran what was aptly been called a fact-free campaign. And this budget, this record of the BC Liberals, the record of budgets, is also, I do not believe, does not reflect fairness. Is it fair that a child born into a house that is poor, or where parents through no fault of their own, maybe having disabilities, or is born into a family where the parents are drug addicts, should go to school hungry, should have fewer chances at life, should have a much lower chance of post-secondary education, or should be at much higher risk of later criminal behavior? Is it fair that people are living under bridges? Is it fair that single mothers walk into my office with their young children, desperate because their rent has just gone up, they are on the edge of being homeless, and we have to tell them that there is little or no hope of them getting into BC housing? Is it fair to those children? Their only fault was being born into a family that was poor or troubled. Is it fair that children born in this province of British Columbia have the highest odds of being born into a poor family? Is it fair that there are children spending virtually all their childhood bounced from foster home to foster home, sometimes being abused in those foster homes, and that the system that is supposed to protect those children is in crisis, despite report after report begging for help and supports for those kids? Is it fair that women are going to court, sometimes up against abusive husbands in divorce cases, fighting to keep their children and asserting their property rights, are going there unrepresented because this government has cut legal aid and has cut social services? Is it fair that post-secondary students have the highest student debt and that post-secondary education is getting farther and farther out of reach for those that do not come from economically advantaged families? Mr. Speaker, this budget and previous budgets of this government do not treat the citizens of this province fairly. What does this government say about that? Essentially, they say, so sad, too bad. They say, at some distant point in the future, some dubious scheme is going to come true and there will be billions and billions and billions of dollars that are all going to make all of our dreams come true. Buy a lottery ticket and buy a dream. But lottery tickets on our future aren't going to help children in care today. Lottery tickets on a dream aren't going to help families getting tossed from their apartments because they can't afford the rent and that they can't get a job today. Pipe dreams and lottery tickets on our future won't help the Christian Lees of the world, murdered, who we now was let down by a community unable to support him because the choice was made not to invest in the services that might have helped him and his family. Look, I know that we can't spend every social dollar that is worthwhile. I understand that. But this government has abdicated our responsibility to our future. Investment in healthy children is just as important as investment in infrastructure. We need balance. And deflecting to the mantra that somehow, some way, billions of dollars are going to come our way, the BC Liberals are abdicating responsibility for building a healthy society now. There is also, I believe, an underlying assumption held by many on the other side, and this is reflected in policy and this government's budget, that there's something the matter with government, that there's something wrong, that government is a bad thing. And there's certainly an overt contention that red tape is bad. Well, what is red tape? Red tape are rules. Red tape are regulations. Red tape are laws put in place to do things like prevent workers' deaths. Red tape are regulations put in place to protect our drinking water, our food, our forest lands, and our health. Red tape are policies put in place to protect vulnerable citizens. I don't want unnecessary regulation more than anyone else, but I think it's very dangerous that we have a government that once again is returning to the ideology that they want to cut regulation and rules without regard to the purpose of those regulations, cutting rules, regulation, and laws simply for the sake of being able to say that they've done it. I've talked earlier about the belief that there must be fairness in government and in how we treat each other. The second standard by which I judge government is whether dollars are spent effectively and efficiently in the best interests of the public. Getting the most bang for the buck, I guess, is the way to put it. The Liberals claim to stand for fiscal prudence and effective deployment of tax dollars. Where Mr. Speaker, my husband and I had a small law firm for many years. Then I stayed home to look after our children for many more years and administered the law firm while he brought in the money. I was also on the Burnaby School Board for 9 years, 2 years as chair. I know how to balance a budget. I know how to deploy every last precious dollar, whether it's my own or whether it's tax dollars, in the most efficient way possible. In one case for my family and another for the students and families of School District 41. I've turned my critical and I hope somewhat discerning eye to the deployment of funds by this government. And the record, I believe, is frankly atrocious. While the members on the other side talk about fiscal prudence, They are simply irresponsible with public funds. Mr. Speaker, I sit on the Public Accounts Committee, and I have seen report after report from the Auditor General pointing to the mismanagement of government funds and government programs. Evergreen-lined report, quote, business cases, admitted assumptions and explanations I considered critical to understanding the project's costs, benefits and risks, and none of the agencies documented the substance of their reviews of the materials presented to Treasury Board, end of quote from the Auditor General. Again, Auditor General on the management of timber. Quote, we concluded that the ministry has not clearly defined its timber objectives. Existing management practices are insufficient to offset a trend towards future forests having a lower timber supply and less species diversity in some areas. The ministry does not appropriately monitor and report its timber results against timber objectives. On Justin, quote, the audit reveals serious security flaws in Justin, the province's computerized criminal justice system. Much of the information found in the Justin database is highly sensitive. The audit concludes with more than 100 detailed recommendations that address Justin deficiencies, many of which are too sensitive to include in this report, end of quote. Environmental assessment. Quote, the Environmental Assessment Office is expected to provide sound oversight of major projects such as mine dams or tourist destination resorts. However, this has not been happening, end of quote. And finally, on the effects of rate-regulated accounting at BC Hydro, which effectively allows BC Hydro to defer to future years certain expenses that would normally be recorded in the current year's financial statements. As of March 31st, 2011, when the report was made, a net total of $2.2 billion in expenses had been deferred, and by government's own estimate, that balance was predicted to and has grown and is predicted to grow to nearly $5 billion by 2007. And as the Auditor General at the time, Mr. Doyle, said, quote, it's a bit like using a credit card. You have to pay it off or you have lots of problems, end of quote. With this has allowed government to siphon money out of BC Hydro, put it hopelessly in debt, and it's a mess now. Some of these reports that I've quoted speak to straight ineptitude and mismanagement, but it is also, I believe, a product of what I think are poor priorities exercised by this government over the last decade. Misplaced priorities that continue on with this budget, Mr. Speaker. Some of my colleagues have talked a little bit about the over-budget projects we have. Again, mismanagement by this government. The Northwest Transmission Line, $342 million over. The South Fraser Perimeter Road, $464 million over budget. The Port Mann Bridge and Highway 1 expansion, $1.8 billion over budget, 120% over budget. The Vancouver Convention Centre, $341 million over budget, and the BC Place roof, $149 million over budget. More than $3 billion over budget. Could have bought a lot of childcare spaces, could have bought thousands of surgeries, sure could have paid for a lot of wheelchairs. In addition to that, and probably contributing to the debt, are those projects, and so now we have a debt that is consistently rising as well. And I won't go through that because many of my colleagues have done that. But for a government and a premier that claims to represent a debt-free BC, I find it absolutely astounding that that they can talk about, that they can have the debt that they have racked up over the last several years and continue to rack up over the next many years. In addition, contractual obligations. $96 billion worth of contractual obligations, P3s and other contracts that are going to lock this province into payments generations into the future. Whether we in the future need those services or not, we are locked into those contracts. Those contracts are going to be paid for by my kids and my children's children. $96 billion that we're going to have to pay the bill for, and they're going to have to pay the bill for. Debt-free, indeed. Prudent management. Malarkey. It is. There are those that are benefiting from these deals. There are those who are getting along very well under this government. And who will benefit under this budget? Who have been the primary benefits? I'll tell you, the largest businesses, the biggest businesses, the businesses whose head offices are in Ontario and New York and London, not local businesses. Businesses that contributed heavily to the BC Liberal Party at election time and had a heck of a lot of government largesse to lose if the BC Liberal Party lost. Who gains under the BC Liberals? Stellar companies, companies like SNC Lavalin, disgraced around the world for corruption, banned from dealing with the World Bank because of its corruption. SNC Lavalin, whose chair, Gwyn Morgan, was a major advisor to the Premier. SNC Lavalin, lucky bidder on P3 deals in British Columbia. SNC Lavalin, illegal party financer to municipal and provincial politicians in Quebec. Great company that the members on the other side are keeping. Who doesn't benefit from the BC Liberal government budget, past and present? Certainly not small businesses. No, they got the HST. Not the hard-working local entrepreneurs in the film business in my community. They haven't benefited. They could have used a break. Not Simon Fraser University and BCIT, who are being starved by a government that does not value post-secondary education or skills training, despite grossly misleading election ads to the contrary. Not the average taxpayer, who got the HST but fought back. The average taxpayer, my neighbours, my constituents who have seen their wages stagnate under this government, if they have a job at all, who have seen hydro rates go up, who have seen MSP rates go up, have seen charges of all kinds go up. They're not benefiting. Not immigrants who can't get their credentials recognized, who are going to the new Work BC centres and unable to get help where they used to be able to get help from companies like, or organizations like Success. Not the businesses in my community who were gobsmacked because post-election they got a rude surprise when they found out the provincial school tax, which the province forces municipalities to collect on their behalf, has just doubled in 1 year. That policy was quietly brought in across the province in February. Businesses didn't find out until now, after the election, where they got a doubling. I've heard, Mr. Speaker, I have heard from dozens of businesses who are appalled.
Members.
No notice before the election, doubling of their Class 5 light industrial rates after the election. Sounds like a familiar theme. One tax story before
Members,
the election.
Please allow the member to have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One tax story before the election, a different one after the election. This budget doesn't help the people of Hummingbird Creek who had their properties destroyed, dozens and dozens of them last year, and cannot get help from this government to build a new culvert in their community. And every year they face the devastation of floods because this government refuses to act on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that claims it's an expert at managing our money, at creating jobs, when in reality, since the Premier brought in her jobs plan, we've had a glorious net 32,000 private sector jobs disappear in this province. Mr. Speaker, this budget certainly does not help the vast majority of women in this province. And it particularly does not help struggling single-parent women who, along with their children, will suffer the most under a government that has an unwavering and blind ideological obedience to trickle-down theories that have failed for the past 12 years. Now we have a core review. And I can tell you, I can predict what this core review is going to mean. It's going to mean exactly what it meant the last time there was a core review. Less services, less health care, less employment services, less investment in children, less services for the sick, less services for seniors, less services for the young, cuts to mental health services, and no investment in childcare in this province. It will be cloaked in a bogus mantra of administrative savings. Bogus savings, just like their bogus budget. But their friends, their big business friends that have always done just fine under this government will continue to do fine for the next 4 years. Mr. Speaker, it probably will not surprise you to hear that I will not be supporting this budget. Thank you very much.